Hello and welcome to this tutorial. This is Casey, and today we're going to talk about mortgage calculations. I know this is something that a topic that most people don't like talking about because it's believed to be for the elite, for the rich, for people who can afford this. But again, there's no harm in learning how to do it. And at the same time, at the end of this video, I will show you how you can completely reduce the interest you pay over the period because of just doing something magical. So stick to the end. Here I have a snippet from a local bank, and the numbers that we'll use is 990,000, which is your mortgage, and of course with an interest of 9.5, and the period is 25 years. So these numbers have already been plugged here. So we just have to start by calculating the monthly payment. The beauty about Excel, it has inbuilt formulas, and one of the inbuilt formulas that is PMT, which you can calculate your mortgage. It has three input fields. One is the rate, which you have to divide by 12 because you're going to pay your mortgage monthly. And then the next point is the number of period, the NPAR, which is equals to the 300. The next one is present value, which is the PV, which is the 990 amount. So once we do that, we get a red because it's a negative number. I'm going to add a negative in front of the formula and it will change that to positive. To affirm our calculations, we can step in here and see that the 8649.60 is equivalent to what we have calculated here. So in other words, this bank has just plugged in an Excel at the back end to compute the numbers. I'll explain about these figures here later. So let's go ahead and start to digging into what inputs do we need to add in all these columns. To start us off, we're going to do the start balance is this amount here. Now payment is equals to B6, which is this amount, and we need to lock in the formula because we will be dragging the formula down so that it retains the same reference point, and interest is calculated by equals to B10 here multiplied by B3, which is the interest, divided by 12. B3 will also be referenced at one point when we drag in the formulas over the number of periods. So we just do that and lock in B3. Now what you'll see is that the payment versus the interest is pretty close. So in other words, in the first month of your payment, this is the principal that you pay. You're actually offsetting your principal by 812 shillings out of 8,000 that you pay. It's quite a huge amount, but again, as I said, I will show you how to offset and how to play around with the numbers so that you can play a minimal interest as much as possible. We're going to skip extra payment, and the end balance here will be equals to this amount here, or B10, which is the amount subtracted by the principal minus extra payments. I'll skip this just for the sake of just giving us some room. And for the month number one up to 300, because that is the number of months that we gonna work on. And then this will be the total interest, which is D10. The principal goes to the principal you pay here plus the extra payment. This is now the calculations of this first line. So now this follows up on the formulas that we need to add, and this one I'll use an EDET. Please, if you find it too complex, don't crack your head. All I'm doing here is saying the previous month, with this June 2024, add 1 month, and that's all this formula does. So you can see here is July, and then the start balance, of course, is this balance that we see here in G10, and then the payment here will be a hairy formula which help us to see at the end period when you are paying the loan, you don't have to pay more than what you're supposed to pay. So if I get a chance, I'll explain it further, but I will show you that this mean formula, which is equal to this amount here plus interest, or whichever is lower between that and the amount that we pay here, which is the monthly payment. We are looking at the minimum amount. Okay, so the next formula we do here is the interest, B11 multiply by the rate, and then we go ahead and divide that by 12, just like the previous one, and we lock in this B12 so that the rate remains constant. That's the target of locking that formula. So the next one here is the principal, which the calculations remain the same, and then the end balance equals to B11 minus the principal minus anything that we paid here, that is our end balance. And then for the month, the previous month plus 1, and then the total interest, in this case, the previous interest plus this interest that we paid. And at the same time, we have the principal, which is equals to the previous principal, this amount here, plus anything we paid extra. And that sums up all computations that we need to do in regards to the formulas here. Now, let's drag our formulas here, and I will just select the last line that we computed, and then we pull it down all the way to 310. Yeah, there. And you can see that at the end of the period, we do have zeros all the way. Where I was explaining it earlier with regards to this specific amount here, you can see that you would have ended up paying 86.49 as opposed to 85.12 because of the variation. Now, this is the interest, 1604,879.08 is the same amount that you see here, 1604,878. Yeah, so what I've done in this example here, I have put a formula which looks at the maximum number of total interest. Because this is a running total, the maximum number will be the total interest that you pay, which will be 1604. I've set it out as the original formula. And then here I would show you the differences of what happens when you make some payments upfront. However, what I'm doing here is just checking on the number of months on the revised period if certain conditions are met. If I was clever enough, I will just go and negotiate this rate with the bank. Let's say, for example, I'll tell them, please, can you lower my rate by just 0.5%? Now you can see that by lowering your rate by 0.5%, you're actually going to save 100,000 over the period. So that's one of the ways you can negotiate and reduce your rate. However, I'm going to put in a graph. Just put in a recommended graph. I'll pick this one. You can see that one line talks about the interest, which is the blue line. So your interest, as time goes, your interest becomes lower. Concurrently, your principal, as you pay more interest, it reduces your amount. Subsequently, you actually lower, you pay more on your principal. So this is the basic foundation of learning about mortgages. What happens in the case whereby I say, because your interest is much higher here, how do you kind of reduce your payment? Now, the secret is you can make a lump sum payment, and let's say 1 year later, you decide to pay 100,000. Okay, this is 100,000 shillings. So look what happens to your loan. The fact that you actually paid 100,000 in the first year, look at how much you're going to save. The interest difference has reduced by almost 600,000. If you get some money earlier on in the period, you'll notice that you've reduced your loan from 25 years to 18, and you've saved yourself close to 600,000. This is massive. However, let me show you where it doesn't make sense if you do the same thing, but at a different stages of the mortgage. So let's assume you got frustrated in December 2040, whereby you are like, I need to knock off this mortgage by now. I mean, it's too much. I can't afford it to leave it anymore. Now, see how much difference it makes. If you pay the same amount later in the period, the only amount you are saving here is 102, right? As opposed to if you had paid it earlier. So if you pay your lump sum late, by the time you're making this decision to offset your loan by a larger amount, your interest you've already paid large sums of interest earlier on, and then you're just making a late call, and this will not make much of a difference. So you can see the same amount you pay on year 1 or year 2 cuts off your huge chunk of period and time. But this one, the same 100K reduces by your loan by 100,000, and that only saves you only 2 years by reducing it from 25 to 23. So these are the tricks that people do. You can even, if you foresee that in the near future I can be able to pay more in my mortgage, then go ahead and take the mortgage, and then start paying your mortgage way in advance so that you can offset the period. So remember, whatever you pay as principal, which has been computed from these payments here, if you do extra payment, this extra payment in column F is excluded from interest calculation. And this is the trick about loans. So I hope you've learned something, and hopefully this Excel and the computation was helpful for you, and see you in my next video.